Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to do a different video than I had planned to do for this week, so it's going to be a little bit off the cuff, or at the very least, a little bit more off the cuff than usual. And it's prompted by several interactions I had during this last week, some in the comments of my videos, some in my interactions on Twitter X, and some because of the live stream that I did on Wednesday and some of the discussion that we had there. And the question that came up in the live stream was, where is the line between beautiful and sexual? Because I create graphic novels and comics. It's a visual medium. It's best I have, at the very least, some basic understanding of where that line is. And by the way, I'm going to tell you right off the bat here, I'm going to say things in this video which are pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable today. But not in the way that you might think. In the way that I talked about last week, wherein I said that most people are so used to thinking outside the box that no one can think inside the box anymore. And the new creativity that you see around you today is actually coming from people who think inside the box because it's so unique in our society. And so I'm thinking way inside the box today. I'm going back to the traditional way of looking at many, many things. And a lot of people are probably going to get squeamish at what I say. Why? Because I'm going to talk about virtue. I'm going to talk about truth. I'm going to talk about beauty. And I'm going to talk about sexuality. And when you combine those things together and actually see that you can come up with a clear moral standard for that last one, it makes people very squeamish. Even so-called conservative people, because they'll say, well, we don't like this woke nonsense. We don't like quote-unquote progressivism, but we're not going to go that far back. We're not going to do that. That's in the past. We don't think about this, that, and the other thing in those old ways. That's prudish. Sorry, no, we're going there. And I got a lot to talk about, so I'll just say, if you want an example of where I think the line is, you might want to click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and take a look at my graphic novels. You've been looking at some of the beautiful art from my graphic novels in the background, which is not completely under my control. I do allow my artists to have some leeway, to say the least. But my stories concentrate on the thing that I'm going to start talking about first, which is the idea of hero, the traditional idea of a hero. So again, if that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. All right, so let's start with what I do on Twitter. Almost every day, well, except for Sunday and Saturday, I post a very simple caption with a very simple picture. It says, "Make comic women beautiful again." And usually I show a picture of a beautiful comic woman, and more likely than not, they're older pictures. And quite honestly, those posts get the biggest engagement by far of any that I put up on Twitter. And if you're wondering what those posts look like, well, I used some of those posts or the pictures from those posts as the background for last week's video. But anyway, when one of these posts actually does well, and they do every once in a while, I draw in people who have, let's say, very differing opinions than mine. Even people, yes, on the other side of the fence, leftists, quote-unquote progressives. And one of them gained some traction this week. And I had a fellow argue with me and post some things from newer comics telling me I was completely wrong, that there were, in his words, sexy women within comics. And I had to stop him there and say, fella, I didn't say sexy. I said beautiful. But he could not distinguish the difference between those two things. And that is one of the tragedies of our current society. So I'm going to get to that difference between beautiful and sexy, but it's going to take a while to get there. As I said, I'm going to start with the idea of hero because virtue plays a very important part in this entire discussion. And oh, by the way, this is going to be dense stuff. Apologies, but this is the leanest form of the entire discussion that I can think of. First off, let's start here. What is the definition of a hero? Well, according to Western civilization, as I always say, the definition of a hero for thousands of years has been a paragon of virtue. And those virtues are very specific, and they are not only specific in how they are defined, but in their number and order. But even before you get there, before you can even get to virtue, first you must have right reason. Now, what is right reason? It is the ability of you as an individual to see the rules of reality clearly enough so that you can then apply those rules to how you think, and therefore your thoughts become in accord with reality, and that is the definition of right reason. Now, this is key, so stick that in your mind for a few minutes. Now, once you have right reason, you can move on to virtue, but I can't go straight there because I have to make a slight detour. There have been some people in my comments making an argument, which is not a very good argument, but making an argument that you can't move from what is to what man should be. That is taking an ought from an is. And they take that argument from Kant, saying you cannot bridge that gap. I want to discuss that just for a moment. I was actually going to do a video completely on that, but I realized it didn't really fit in with my normal videos. Then I was going to write an article for Lotus Eaters and put it up there because I have done that before. But I simply don't have the time to do that. I have one late book right now and 4 scripts that I'm working on. I think it would be a disservice to my patrons to take my time and put it towards something like that. But anyways, I'll mention it today. You can absolutely bridge that gap going from right reason to virtue. Here's how. The argument that this fellow was making was spurious, at best, as I said in the comment to him, because it is based upon a model of interpretation of human nature under the qualities of the limited concepts of mathematics. So, nearly all modern philosophers, from Descartes to Hobbes, and that would include Kant, have tended to understand the notion of the nature of things in the form of geometrical mathematics, or geometrical models. Now, in such a model, inferences from is to ought, from reality to morality, or from the natural to the normative must be described as fallacious. I agree. However, they then go on to apply this model to human nature as well. However, as understood from Aristotle all the way through to Aquinas, this model cannot be applied to human nature. And there exists means by which one might comprehend the nature of things without relying upon the simple model of a geometrical figure. And it's an error to conceive of the nature of a human being as if it were identical to the nature of a square or a rectangle or a circle. Why? Because change is relevant to the nature of a human being, whereas it is not at all relevant to that of a circle or a square. When you conceive of a geometrical model of a circle or a square or a rectangle, it's an absolute conception. There is no change admitted at all. However, again, a man by his nature, by his very nature, and in his very nature, is subject to development. That is to say, he is a creature of potentialities, and therefore he is one who is not all that he might be or that he could be. And it is impossible to determine what a human being, just as a human being, really is, in fact, without determining what he might be or what he could be. That is to say, without taking into account a man's potentialities and actualities towards which those potentialities are oriented. Therefore, it is not dubious at all to infer an is from an ought in human beings, because the very is of human nature already has contained an ought within it, because that ought is, this man is not fully formed. He ought to be that if he wishes to be complete. That's part of the very nature of human beings. And that's part of why we use right reason, because we can get from an is, which is reality, to an ought, which is virtue. And oh, by the way, this is the exact thing necessary as well for accepting the idea of unalienable rights. But anyways, that's the headiest I'm going to get into all of that. I just wanted to put that down there in case anybody wanted to argue that point. Because what I'm going to do for the rest of this is to do the exact same thing I did right here, is to use natural law to describe these morality-based arguments. That's what you do in my tradition. In my religious tradition, you start with natural law. Usually, half the argument that you make is natural law. Then you take that natural law argument and you apply it to the religious tradition to show how that religious tradition brings out the very thing that is part of natural law. But anyway, told you I was going to go deep into this. So let's move on. You have right reason. Right reason, when it is engaged correctly, necessitates that you see reality as it actually is. Once that is accomplished, you can then move on to the virtues. You move on to the first virtue, which is prudence, which is the ability to make decisions according to right reason. Once you have a grasp on that, you can move on to justice, which is to render every man what is his due. When you have a grasp on that, then you can move on to fortitude, which is the ability to live out those other virtues despite the slings and arrows of human existence. Then, once you have a handle on that, you can move on to temperance. And temperance is the realigning of all of those virtues so that one does not steal from the other and cause the entire thing to collapse. Because if you concentrate too much on one more than the other, bad things will happen. Justice will become vengeance, fortitude will become foolhardiness, etc. And here's the thing. Since temperance actually reorders not just the other virtues, but also right reason itself, the entire thing goes around in a circle. I always like to think of it as a circle of dominoes. And there is a linchpin domino that connects the end of temperance and the beginning of right reason again. Because again, you're trying to use temperance to reorder your right reason and all the rest of the virtues going around and around and around in a circle, because you can make them more and more perfect and then become more and more virtuous and then become more and more heroic. But here's the thing. There is something within mankind that tries over and over and over again to topple over that linchpin domino to cause the entire thing to collapse. And what is that? Well, that's how human beings look at sexuality. So let me move on to, again, as best as I can possibly can, the bare bones argument for this entire thing. And by the way, let me reiterate, this is the linchpin that holds the entire thing together. And if those virtues are what hold up our society, it's also the linchpin which holds together our society, at the very least, our Western culture. So the argument goes like this. The only way that you can justly, carnally know another individual is through marriage, and not just any old marriage, but a marriage that is indissoluble. Why? Because that's the only form where you can have carnal knowledge in a way that it is two individuals completely giving themselves over to each other. There is zero taking on either side. There is only 100% giving on either side. And the reason why it has to be in marriage and an undissoluble marriage, because that 100% giving needs to be everything that you are and everything that you ever will be. If you're reserving anything at all, even the notion that, well, I'll be with you now, but maybe in the future, I'll divorce you, I'll just take off, I'll leave you, doesn't matter, I'm not going to support you, maybe, I keep that option open to me. If that option, in the slightest, is in your mind open, then you're not giving yourself 100%. If you're not giving yourself 100%, then you are taking something from the other person in a very specific and unique way. You are using them. And the argument follows that you are using them for your own gratification, not as an act of pure self-giving. But the only way you can use something, in the terms used within this argument, is by first possessing it. So in keeping something to yourself, you're using the other person. In using the other person, you have an attitude that you can, at the very least, for this very moment, possess this other person for your own personal pleasure. And it doesn't matter one whit if both people agree to use each other in this manner. It's the act of that thought existing within your mind that you can use another person. It leads to the idea that, yes, I can possess another person. And we have a name for that. The name for that is slavery. And it doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter if it's just this one time, in this one place, in this very specific amount of time. It doesn't matter. If you hold to any of that, you believe somewhere deep within you that slavery is okay. That you can, yes, indeed, own another person. It usually follows that if X, Y, and Z conditions are met, sure, I can own another person. I can use another person. I can possess another person. Most people don't think of it that way, but that's the way the natural law argument follows. But here's the thing. Each of us know, deep down within ourselves, within our own human nature, that we have no right whatever to possess another person. How do we know that? Because we know that no other person has the right to possess us. If that is our nature, and everybody has the same nature, therefore, it is the same for everybody, not just yourself, and we know slavery is wrong. But here's the thing. Again, how does it connect to virtue? Well, it connects to virtue on what I talked about, because if you believe that about human beings, even in the slightest, you are not looking at reality and the rules of reality through the clarity of truth. You're looking at them through a funhouse mirror of your own sexual desire and pleasure. That view of human beings completely obliterates your ability to see the rules of reality as they actually are. Because why? Because it's about human beings. And you're a human being and you're using your own humanity to interpret reality. And if you cannot do that correctly, you destroy right reason. And if you destroy right reason, that knocks over the domino of prudence, which knocks over justice, which knocks over fortitude, which knocks over temperance. And so if you are intemperate in this way, it will knock the virtues over. Now let's move on from there to try and apply those standards to the ideas of beauty and sexuality, and see if we can find the dividing line between the two. One of the ways that we can do that is by looking at the instrument whereby that self-giving can occur. And that instrument is, of course, marriage. A true and undissoluble marriage between a man and a woman. And why does it have to be a man and a woman? Because there needs to be, at the very least, the potentiality of life emerging from this union. And by the way, I'm using potentiality in the logical sense. That is to say, if you look at the abstract nature of the man and the abstract nature of the woman, there is the potential through the mixing of those two natures to produce another life. I'm not talking about any specific situation. We're talking about logical potentiality. But we know that if you take the nature of a man and combine it with the nature of another man, there's no chance. There's no chance. Or a woman with another woman, there's no chance. There's no potentiality there. But anyway, let's move on. So again, natural law, Western civilization agrees that there are two specific parts to marriage. One, the potentiality of life emerging from it, and two, the mutual sharing of life by those two individuals. Now for a second, let's take sexuality and apply it to the first one of those, and beauty and apply it to the second. And we're going to do so in accord with what I always talk about with story. Now first off, we have to admit that both of those things have virtue. There is virtue within sexuality, there is virtue within beauty. But you can also use those things in a vicious way, which is the opposite of virtue, vice. So let's say, since I write comic books, graphic novels, and show pictures of beautiful women all the time, let's say the artist of a certain comic draws a woman in a hypersexual way, instead of, that is to say, a beautiful way. Where's the line? How do you distinguish between the two? Now, here's where things get a little bit muddy, not because they are logically muddy, but because our society is so mixed up that we have no significant standard for any of that. But you go back 50 years, 75 years, yeah, there was a norm. There was a cultural norm, which everyone would say, or at the very least 99% of your culture would say, yeah, that's crossing the line. No, you've gone too far there. You can't put that down on a page. You just can't. And since our current stagnant, so-called progressive society has tried to obliterate any standard or any norm like that, let's at the very least try to find the general vicinity of this line. The general vicinity is the difference between vice and virtue. If you're presenting something which is stirring up a vice within the audience, and again, it can be different for different people, once again, because we have no standards in our society, if you're stirring up a desire within that person to fulfill something which is technically a virtue, which is to say to reproduce, if you're stirring that up in them in a way that cannot be fulfilled, you're actually engaging in vice. That is to say, let's say you're presenting these pictures of beautiful women over and over again, and it's just making the reader want to express that desire. It's a vice because expressing that desire is a good thing if you do it in the right way, but there's absolutely no way you're going to be able to do that sitting there reading a book. It's like having this hole in your life, this thing that's missing. You desire it not to be missing, but the hole is only filled by a virtuous act. If you try to fill it up with vice, it's never going to be enough. You can throw as much vice at it as you want. It's never going to be enough. And if you're looking at a 2D static picture of a woman, if it's not a real woman and one that you have a connection to, you're not fulfilling that desire. It's not happening. What more, if you can actually fulfill that desire, if you have a woman in your life that you can go and fulfill that desire with, what are you going to do with the book? Well, you're going to put it down. Yeah, I want to go do that, not sit here and read. And that's the exact opposite of what you want to do with an audience. Get them to put your book down. Because will they come back to it? God only knows. And again, where that line should technically be, I know better than to put that in my YouTube video. Because the entire video would just be derailed by the comments of people saying, no, the line should be here, 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 and here. But that gives you a general vicinity. And we can narrow down that general vicinity by then looking at how to portray beauty, which is a correct way to portray beauty. Because here's the thing about beauty. It can work in the exact opposite way of what I just described. Because if you present something that is truly beautiful down on the page, yes, it's only a representation of beauty, but still, not only can it be fulfilled by you continuing to read the book, but it can then inspire the fulfillment of that pursuit of beauty within the rest of your life as well. Now, I realize that beauty can be included in sexuality, but this video is getting long enough as it is. Let's just concentrate on the absolutes for a moment, understanding that there is some overlap here. But the point is, again, if you're portraying something that is stirring up a desire which cannot be met by you continuing to read the book, then you're actually being counterproductive. If you present something, however, that is beautiful, which stirs up the desire within the person to continue reading, to continue living in this world which you are presenting, because it becomes so real to them that they want to spend more time with that beauty, which is the second part of the entire idea of marriage. It is the sharing of a space with someone else that includes sharing it in truth and beauty. You can do that within a story. You can do that within a comic. You can present the beautiful and attract the person to want to keep on reading because they want to spend more time with what is beautiful. And again, the greatest idea that can be presented in that way is one that inspires the person to then, after they are done with that world, go out and seek that beauty in reality itself. Not just the representation of that beauty as it is on the page, but the beauty itself as it exists within your life. That is the exact same thing you can do with heroism. Because heroism is part of what is true, is part of what is good, is part of what is beautiful. That is the greatness of a heroic story. You are drawn to the heroism of this character. You want to continue to read on, to see how they persevere. The beauty of what they do in the virtue of expressing themselves as heroes draws you in and makes you want to spend more time with that beautiful thing. And as you spend more and more time with it, with that character, with that story, then inspires you to actually live out that beautiful, virtuous character within your own self. And this goes back to what I was talking about before. If you're looking at the page and are desiring what is going on there on the page, if you're desiring that woman, if you're desiring to possess that person, even if it's an abstract character, then you're desiring something vicious. You're desiring something that destroys your ability to use right reason. And in short, you're desiring to do something which is supposed to have its virtue within the confines and structure of marriage, which itself has its own particular end, which is the potentiality of the creation of life. If that's not there, you're staring down the barrel of vice. But if, on the other hand, you're inspired to acts of self-giving, if you're inspired to simply be in the presence of what is beautiful without possessing it, which is one of the heights of virtue of what marriage is within the companionship that is offered there, if you are seeking to allow that beauty to exist freely, as long as you can be in its presence, then that's when you're looking up at virtue. And I won't hide the fact that both of those are desires. But one desire is to act in accord with a fantasy, in a way that reality does not exist, because you think, in a prideful manner, that you're exempt from the rules of reality, even if it's just for this moment. But the other is a desire to live in the presence of something that is good. Not to possess it, not to control it, not to dominate it, to let it be, because that's part of how it is beautiful. It doesn't depend on you. And deep down, you know that if you try to grab it, squeeze it, possess it, you will destroy it, because part of its nature is to be free. So I suppose, to make a long story short, yes, sexuality does contain within it a beauty and a virtue. But if you're being presented this kind of beauty in a way that you want to dominate it, possess it, use it, you've crossed the line. But if you're presented beauty in a way that stirs up a desire within you to, first off, simply exist within its presence, so that you can receive the self-giving of that beautiful thing, which in turn will inspire you to the virtue of living out the true, the good, the beautiful in your own life, then that is a representation of beauty that should never be ignored. All right, I know that was sort of a out there video even for me, so if you've made it this far to the end, thank you very much. Leave me a comment, tell me what you think about all this. Click on the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And if you're so inclined, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you, especially if you want to read true stories of heroism and virtue and all the things I talked about here that lead to the fulfillment of a better life, at the very least, in some small way. All right, now I'm rambling. I'll see you later. Bye.